today's topic, let me introduce to you our speaker today, Pramitha Ranshika. Pramitha is a well-known chartered accountant with a wealth of experience. He is currently the head of commercial and finance for a courier business in tomroow, one of the largest transportations and logistic companies in the world. Pramitha started his career with PW Sri Lanka as a teenager and moved to its UK head office at a young age of 22. He hasn't looked back ever since and has held numerous senior positions for well-known multinationals across multinational geographical locations in Australia, Dubai, Saudi Arabia, UK, and Sri Lanka. A natural leader and a passionate speaker who is renowned for raising the bar consistently. Pramitha is notable for achieving an improbable feat of winning 10 prizes from foundation to F2 level at chartered accountancy exams within 2 years' time. Dear participants, now we can begin. Pramitha, over to you.
Thank you very much, Shanta. And let me share my screen. Please let me know when you can see my screen.
We can say it properly, Pramitha. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. So good day, everyone. My name is Pramitha Ranshika. It's about soft skills for tomorrow. So before we start, if you even want to keep in touch with me after this session, you would be able to do so through my YouTube channel, which is Pramitha's Vlogs, or you would be able to keep in touch with me through my Facebook page, which is Pramitha's Blogging, or you would be able to keep in touch with me through my LinkedIn page. So what do we have in agenda for today? Now, we'll start with a quick intro to the soft skills. So I'm going to talk about why it's important and what are the different types of soft skills that we as professionals need to bear in our mind. Now, then I'm going to start going deep dive into some of the various soft skills. Now, I'm going to focus more towards the practical elements of it. So I'm going to handpick some of the important soft skills which are important no matter where you are at your career. And then I'm going to start giving you some practical tips for that, starting with communication skills. And then we'll move on to negotiation skills. So I will go down deeper as to the way that you should conduct negotiations and what are the various question techniques and what are the do's and don'ts that you need to do in a negotiation. Then we'll move on to the all important skill of leadership skills. And then we'll move on to some of the other soft skills, starting with time management, resilience, flexibility. And once we conclude our formal session, we'll then move on to Q&A, where I'd try to answer majority of the questions as much as possible. Now, before I move on to the main part of the session, I would like to start asking a poll question. So there would be a poll question appearing to you at the moment. Don't worry, I would not see your individual answer. Rather, I would get to know the results of the poll. So you can see that in your screen. So what is the main barrier for you to move up in your career? So you have 4 alternatives. You could select which one is more relevant to you. And as I reiterate, I won't get to know your individual answers. Rather, I would get to know the overall results of this. So if I can give you a minute to quickly give you the answer, that's great. All right, I hope you had enough time to answer that question. End of the day, it's not an exam question. It's just to get an idea about or get a feel about the crowd today. Now, if I may ask the panelists to show me the results of the poll question or show us the results, that's great. Well, there is a clear winner. If you could see the results, so majority of you, or almost majority of you, said the biggest barrier for you to move up in your career is communication, closely followed with leadership skills and bad boss or company. Well, cool, that's all right. So we'll move on with that in our mind. All right, now moving on. So what do we mean by soft skills? It's a myriad of skills to start with. And we have communication skills. Some of you have already identified that as the main barrier for you to move up. That's great. So we'll deep down a bit as to how we would improve our communication skills. Negotiation and conflict resolution. You see, you could be a great person when it comes to your technical skills, but for the people who are doing great at the top are the ones who are really good at negotiations and who are really good at conflict resolution. Because end of the day, when you're at commercial organizations or when you're at your personal life, it's always important that you do negotiations and conflict resolution for the best way possible. So we'll talk about that as well. Decisiveness. There is a great saying which says, ask for forgiveness is better than ask for permission. Why is that? Because people need to be swift in their decision making. People need to make decisions faster, and we are living in an ever fast evolving world. So decisiveness is quite quick. Flexibility. Gone were the days that you could have a fixated mindset where you're going to say my way or the highway. Now the things have changed. World has become an evolving place ever since. So you have to be flexible and you have to go with the right attitude towards that. Responsibility. Most people like to get the credit of work that they do, but few would like to accept the responsibility. Now responsibility is quite key if you want to grow up. Self-motivation. We always look for channels where external parties could motivate us. We always think that, look, my boss is not motivating me, my family is not motivating me. Oh, what if I'm to tell you the best part of that is if you are able to motivate yourself despite what's going on, that is what is more important for you. Leadership skills. As we all know, if you want to grow up in the ladder, you need to demonstrate various types of leadership skills, and I'm going to talk about that in detail. Ability to work under pressure and time management. Teamwork. We are not just going to be working as robots, just doing our own task. If you want to be successful, you need to deal with team who are culturally different, who think different than you, and who have grown up in different environments. So it's important that you work in a team, or if you are a leader, you drive that team to make sure that the company achieves in their objectives. Problem solving skills. People and companies are looking for those professionals who can solve problems, not to create them. If you are just going to get stuck around by halfway through, probably you are not achieving, or you are not going to be the go-to person. So that's one of the other things which is there. Now, having this in mind, let's move on to our second poll question, which I would like to get a feel of it. So hopefully it will appear within a few seconds for you. So in your spare time, what do you like to do most? Take a few seconds to answer this. So I would like to see what's the, I would like to get a feel of what's the view of majority of yours. So I'll give you a few seconds for you to answer. All right, I hope I gave you enough time. Now, can I please have the results? It's been split. So, well, the winner is you like to watch TV and browse through social media. Well, I'll touch upon that a bit later. And there is a tie between reading a book and connect with family. Interesting, and 14% of you allowed to plan for future. Well, that's great. Everyone is different as I started this session. Well, having that in mind, let's move on. Right, now let's start with the communication. Now, when I realized if I take my memory back to the first poll question we asked, you said that majority of you consider communication skills is the biggest barrier for you to move up in the ladder. Now, let's talk about communication to start with. Now, first and foremost, communication is not about you speaking with an accent, you coming up with flash jargon, you coming up with the flash technological words or technical words when it comes to discussions. Communication is all about you making sure other party understands what you're trying to say. And at the same time, it's also making sure that you listen to the other party. Listening can be different in two ways. You can either listen to respond or you can listen to understand. Now, what is more important is you listen to understand, not to respond. Because more often than not, if there is an issue with communication, it's because there is some person is not listening. And communication is not going to be a 100-meter sprint. You're not going to improve it overnight. So that's the first and foremost thing that you need to bear in your mind. It's going to take time. It's like a marathon. It's going to take time. If I take your memory back, when you learned how to ride a bike, You initially started, you failed, you may have fallen off, you may have started with 2 wheels attached to the bike, or you may have started with a tricycle. Then gradually you moved into being an expert in riding a bike. Communication is like that. You have to do it gradually, but there are a few techniques that you can adopt so that you could supercharge or you could boost in improving your communication skills. And I will touch upon to that in a bit. Well, when it comes to communication, the most important thing for you to understand is it's probably learned on a trial and error basis. What do I mean by that? You always tend to make mistakes when it comes to communication, and you need to learn from that. I'll take your memory back maybe 20, 15, 16 years ago when you were just a school leaver. Now imagine your communication skills at that point of time. Now compare that to where you are now. You may have kind of great distance. If you compare that, you have been a fantastic individual for the time being, but as you yourself has identified, it's not enough. Communication is evolving. Yes, you have been at a fantastic place now compared to 15 or 16 years ago, but you need to reach to the next level. And what you need to do, when it comes to communication, it can be either verbal or it can be written. For you to be good, you need to be good at both. I'll start with verbal communication. The first and foremost rule in verbal communication is you need to speak in a flow that we all understand. Now, imagine if I'm a person who is going to communicate this to you, saying that the first thing in the verbal communication, you get what I'm saying. People tend to lose focus if you do not speak in a flow. And when they do a research about who can grow up in the ladder in companies, people whose communication skills the best, they grow up in the ladder faster. Maybe their technical skills are not great, but they are good communicators. If you look at great leaders, they are great communicators. You look at Martin Luther King, you look at Barack Obama, you look at anyone, you get to hear some of the best speakers in the world has ever seen. So you need to start speaking in a flow. Speaking in a flow is not about an accent. Speaking in a flow is about speaking in a way that other party gets on attracted or gets on interested of what you have to say. And I'll tell you how you could improve that a bit. Now, the next most important thing, and this is quite apparent if English, I use English as your communication means, because more often than not, English is the business language. Now, you generally hear, if it is your second language, people use redundant words, things or redundant sound like, no. Some people say, I know, no. Or some people say, I know, no. It doesn't sound great. Or sometimes people use some repetitive redundant pauses like, I mean. Now, if I were at your place, I would rather say you would be better off if you just pause for a moment and gather your thoughts rather than trying to continue your flow by putting redundant words. If you feel that you cannot fill up the vacuum, probably it's worthwhile that you take 5-10 seconds off and then regather your thought and then you start communicating. And you need to make a conscious effort. If you are a person who makes these redundant sounds and redundant words, you need to make a conscious effort to reduce it. I'm not saying you have to stop it altogether, but reduce it as much as possible, because the more redundant words you use, the other party will get the feeling that you are not good at communication. And for you to do that, the best way to do that is to build up your vocabulary. If you talk about a toddler may have a vocabulary anything between 300 to 500 words. And you know, the way the toddlers speak, that's pretty basic. They build up basic sentences because your vocabulary is lower. And for you to be good at communication, your vocabulary has to expand. You don't necessarily need to start by hearting an English dictionary for that. There can be simple things that you could do. I'll give you an example from my end, that what I would do. Every time I watch a TV show, or I listen to radio, or even if I just read a blog or read a book, if I come up with a new phrase, or if I come up with a new word, I just write it down. Or in these days, I don't write it down in a book or write it down in a piece of paper. Instead, I just put that in my notes and I just put the word or meaning, what it is mean, or what does it mean? It's not just the new words, it's a terminology as well. I could give you an example. Maybe I'll watch a TV, then I'll hear a term like a simple term like, oh, I have thrown him under the bus. Well, I write it down because I believe that I can use it when it comes to communication, rather than telling someone that I'm putting you in a difficult scenario. I would say, I do not want to throw you under the bus. You see, there is a difference. And you could always come up with some new words as well. Then you could write it down so that you could refer at a later stage of time. So what I do when I write it down, I start referring it at a later stage of time. Now, when it comes to written communication, now, again, it's always important, whatever you write, it's grammatically correct. Now, gone were the days that you have to go through a teacher or a lecturer who's good at English or grammar. Now you have various softwares, and one of the things which I use is Grammarly. So Grammarly is a Google-based software. It's available in both App Store as well as Google Store. You would be able to just download it, or it can be web-based. If you want to write an email, let's say you are writing to an audience who are senior, so it has to be professional, the tone has to be utmost professional, and the words has to pass that message that you want to pass. So you could just write it there and you could check the grammar. It will give you grammatical error, basic errors, and it will give you issues with the tone, the way that you are presenting. You could change the tones and see what are the different words that you could use. You can either go for a basic version of it, which is free, or you could go for a subscribe version, which I think it's going to cost you about $100 US. But in my view, it's worth it. I'm not promoting that product, but what I'm telling you is what I generally use when I have to be extra careful with regards to my grammar and the way that I present my emails or report. Read. You mentioned that communication skill is a hindrance, and I told you that you cannot necessarily improve it overnight. In my case, I generally read about 30 to 35 books. You don't necessarily need to read books for you to improve your communication skills. You can do other means. Internet is a world of knowledge. You can go and read blogs. You can read various blogs. And even if you get bored reading various blogs about professional matters, you can probably log into Cricinfo and you can start reading through a cricket journal there. Probably you will learn a few words from there as well. More you read, more your vocabulary is going to increase, more you are going to be confident when it comes to communication. And the moment you start small and you can improve it over a period of time, your communication is going to flow. This is another important element. Whether it's verbal communication or written communication, try avoid passive voice as much as possible. So what do I mean by that? You can either use active voice or passive voice. For an instance, you could say the book was read, or you could say he is reading the book, or he was reading the book. So you rather use active voice, which was to say he was reading the book, rather than saying the book was read. I'm not saying you don't have to do it, but active voice is generally preferred in business communication than passive voice. And remember, sometimes we try to communicate a message in the most complex way possible. And sometimes you end up writing a very lengthy sentences. And at the end of the day, you might not end up passing the message you wanted to pass to start with. Now, it's worthwhile if you just break it down. You don't necessarily need to write complex sentences, whether it's a business report or whatever it is. It can be simple, break it down to short sentences so that the message is passed in an intended way. And you don't necessarily always have to use complex English all the time. You can use simple English, but the important part is you should use a variety of words. The way you could use a variety of words, you have to build up vocabulary. How do you build up vocabulary? Read. And you need to make sure that you start putting down those words which will come up when you read. And I mentioned about if you come up with a new phrase or word, try to save it somewhere that you can use it for future reference. Now, as I said, you have to do this continuously. And I'll start talking about habit when I move along, but it's all about making sure that if you start small, you do it over a period of time gradually, and then over no time, you would see the improvements. Now, this is the basic idea of communication. Having that in mind, let's move on to negotiation. Negotiation is a form of communication. You always want to have great deals. Now, first and foremost thing in negotiation, what we need to understand is you're going to communicate, you're going to negotiate with another human being. And when you communicate with another human being, they want to be understood and accepted, which means you need to show empathy. You need to make sure that you understand what's their point of view. You may have a different point of view, but more often than not, negotiations can be successful if you demonstrate that you understand and you accept the other person. And this is quite important before we talk about any communication or any negotiation techniques. But there are two primary urges of us, and this is all biological. I'll explain you through the history of mankind. Thousands and thousands of years ago, when we were at our primal age, we used to live in savanna or the jungle. So human beings always surrounded with danger all the time. So they might be walking in the jungle. There could always be a lion attacking you, or maybe a tiger attacking you. So you have to always be prepared for it. Now, there was always a biological response towards that. The response was it releases a stress hormone all the time, which means if you feel a danger, your stress hormones start to getting released. That means you would either fight, that means you would fight the lion, you have the urge to fight the lion, or you flee, you run away from the lion, or you freeze. That means you can't do anything, you just freeze, and it's a biological response. We might not be living in the jungle anymore. We are 60 or 80 or 100,000 years after, we might be living in our houses or in the buildings, whatever. But our biological structure hasn't changed a bit. While the dangers we face are not real, we always anticipate the danger, the virtual danger, not necessarily the virtual danger, the danger everywhere. So if someone attacks you, if someone attacks your control, if someone attacks your space, your same stress hormone is going to be released. And if your stress hormone is going to be released, you are not going to think through. That means your brain is going to make a snap judgment. Now, in negotiation, you need to be aware about it. You should not make snap judgment. And more importantly, you should not allow the other party to make snap judgment. How could you do that? You make sure that they are felt safe and secure, and they feel in control. And I'll come to that with practical examples shortly. Listen intensely. I cannot stress this enough. This is true for communication. This is true for negotiation. This is true for leadership skills. You should not just listen to respond. You should listen to understand. More often than not, we try to listen, and whenever you are listening to someone, you are always structuring what the answer that you are going to give, because you always want to respond. That's not an active listening. You have to listen to understand. Now, keeping those tips in mind, let's move on. When it comes to negotiation, the first and foremost thing you need to prepare, I'm not talking about finding whatever the dirt on the other party. I'm talking about trying to understand what type of people who are going to come through from the other place. And you just make sure you probably do a mock preparation with your colleagues. So you ask some of the questions and you try to build up answers so that by the time you go there, you're not going to get caught off guard. Listen to understand, not to respond. I talk about it. Don't assume. More often than not, there is always going to be an elephant in the room. You might think, or you get the view that there is a negative perception on the table. You know for a fact that the other party is not feeling comfortable. So you assume maybe it's not right for me to start talking about it. But what if I tell you, if there is an elephant in the room, you rather put that on the table. You rather make sure you address it. If you feel that things are not going right, you could probably ask the question. It seems that you are uncomfortable about something. May I know what is bothering you? So you let the other person express themselves. So instead of assuming, always better to put the negative perception on the table. And this is important. You see, it's a sales strategy to close negotiations quickly. You might sometimes get a call saying that, well, there is a great product and it's 20% off and it's going to last next 15 seconds. So I want you to make a decision quickly. So they want to get into your snap judgment. But in negotiation, never ever do that. Because if you try to do that in a negotiation, if you just put the other person in the hot seat and tell him you have 5 minutes to decide, probably person might say yes, because he just want to get out of it. The moment you put the person on the hot seat, that means you are getting into his control span. He feels uncomfortable. He doesn't think through properly. He will just say yes because he wants to get out of it. That means at a later stage of time, he or she might change the view. So it's always important you give the other party the time to think through whatever the proposition that you are bringing up. Value and price are not always the same. It's two different things. You might think that you have the cheapest price, you have the best product, so you are going to win it. Not necessarily. People on the other hand, at the end of the table, as I told you, they're human beings. They're emotional. They have multitude of things which are going in their mind. They value other things. probably you might have the cheapest product, but if you do not value the culture of the other party, they might say, you know what, I don't care about the price that he's offering me. He doesn't understand my culture. Probably he's not the right guy. You do not want to end up in a situation like that. You always make sure that you understand, uncover that black swan. That means what is more important to other party than the price itself, so that you could start funneling your strength towards that. Know how to make no work for you. And this is quite important, and I'll come to that again. Now, we always think that negotiation is about getting other party to accept, getting the other party to submit to yes. But what if I tell you, you can probably work no better than yes. So if you focus more on getting the other party's no, you might do better than getting the other party to say yes. I'll come to that in a bit. Obviously, any meeting, any negotiation without agreeing on an implementation plan is just a futile exercise. Any meeting, any negotiation, you have to make sure you agree tangible action plans at the end. Otherwise, you both have wasted time. So these are some of the tips when it comes to negotiation. Right. Now, negotiation, or for that matter, communication, is not about the words you utter. Communication fails most of the time because people always judge the other party through the words. Communication is all about the body language and the tone. Research always shows you 93% of the message is passed through the tone and the body language. And when you're working in a virtual world, it becomes ever difficult. Why? Because you might be writing an email and the other party have no clue what's your tone and what's your body language is. Which means whatever the way that you write an email, probably you want to be the nicest person possible and that you would write an email. But the other party may end up interpreting it as a rude or an aggressive email because there is no two people meeting together. So that is why you have to make sure even when you write an email, or forget about just meeting face to face, even when you write an email, just reread it to understand your tone and the body language that you present through those words is appropriate. But if you're meeting a person face to face, you have to give a clear indication towards it. For an instance, you might meet me and you might greet me saying good morning. I can reply to you saying good morning. That means, yep, I'm happy to see you. I would rather say good morning. I would say good morning. You see, 3 different tones, exact same words giving you 3 different messages. This is the same thing that you need to focus on any types of communication and negotiation. Just focus on the incongruities between the tone and body language and the words. Now, this is again going back a bit psychological. I mean, I'm not a psychologist, but I would like to talk some examples through the research which psychologists have conducted. Now, probably some of you may have heard the concept of mirror neurons. So what do we mean by mirror neurons? That means if there are 2 parties meeting together, the feelings of one party is going to be mirrored by the other party, whether he is conscious about it or not. What does that mean? If I smile, there is a high likelihood the other party might smile back at me unconsciously. He doesn't necessarily need to think about it. That's the work of mirror neurons. If I am sad, that's why the person who meets me feels sad. That's the work of mirror neuron. Now, it's important if you go to a meeting room, you go with a smile face. You do not want to go with a grumpy face so that you do not give a bad impression. And you have to go slow. You might be great at what you do. You have to always give the other party the room, the control that he needs. And there are 3 tones that you should use. You see, I mentioned when you talk, it's about not just the words, it's about the tones as well. You should always go with a tender tone. What do I mean by a tender tone? If you drive late night, sometimes you might be listening to late night radio. And in late night radio, you don't see the broadcaster or even the songs they play. They're not the R&B or hip hop or whatever. That's the gentle music, the gentle tone that they're going to speak to, because they know that's the time where you are most relaxed. That's the exact same tone that you should go with. That's your default tone for any communication or any negotiation. And you have to always come out positively. You don't have to be a person who seems to be not sure, or a person who is negative with his attitude. You have to come up positive and assertive. Assertiveness doesn't necessarily need to be every time. You can to be assertive when it is required to be. But more often than not, you have to be tender. You start with tender and you start with a positive note. And then when it is required, you have to be assertive. Remember, don't ever settle for I'll try or you are right. That means you plan to fail. Why I say that? Now imagine you start explaining about a fantastic product to someone else. The person might listen to you. A person might say, yes, you're right. Yes, you're right with what you say. Person might not understand a clue about what you said, but he doesn't want to feel, or he doesn't want to be rude to you. So he just said, yeah, you are right. So when someone tells you you are right, that doesn't necessarily agree with what you said. He's just agreeing with you. But instead, if you explain about the thought process, and if the other party has really listened to you, he would say, that's right. Because he was not listening to you. He was not trying to be in good terms with you. Instead, he was focusing on the message that you passed. So he would instead say, that's right. So always try to get that's right instead of you're right. And this is again common sense. As much as possible, let the other party suggest the price in communication. You don't want to be the person who suggests the price. You want the other party to suggest the price. Why? Because sometimes the other party may have a better price than you already had in your mind. So always make sure when it comes to price, you put it at the last. You do not want to be the person who shoot the gun first. And as I reiterate, he who fails to plan is planning to fail. And that's important for anything, not just negotiation. Now let's move on to questioning techniques, not just for negotiation. This is important to build up our communication techniques as well. Now, questions can be asked as an open-ended or closed-ended question. In negotiation, what you shouldn't do is asking closed-ended question. You should not simply ask questions which the other party can simply say yes or no. That means, why is that? Because you won't be able to uncover what's really going there in their mind. Instead, if you ask an open-ended question, open-ended question gives the other party to explore their mind. It gives them to expand. It gives them to explain their thought process, which means they might end up giving you valuable information, or they might end up uncovering black swans, which you wouldn't have been able to uncover if you're just asking close-ended question. So this is quite important. Again, practice. Even at home, just practice asking open-ended questions rather than close-ended questions. In teaching, you call it teach, don't tell. How do you teach people? By asking open-ended questions. This is quite a difficult technique. You could only improve that if you practice well. And as I said, communication is all about the words and the tones and the right way that you communicate. Instead of telling someone that you can't leave the negotiation table, let's say there is an impasse or there is a disagreement. Don't just tell the other party you cannot just leave the negotiation table. Instead, you could ask, what do you hope to achieve by going? It's an open-ended question. You're not putting the other party into the hot seat. You are just letting the other party to explain why they are doing so. Instead of saying a blatant no, you could reword it. How am I supposed to do that? Your boss might ask you, I need this deadline. I need you to complete this report within 15 minutes. Instead of saying there is no way I could do that, you could say, how am I supposed to do that? Then let the other person explain. Then let the other person to think through what they have asked so that they really understand whether they have asked a reasonable question or not. You could ask, what made you ask? Instead of just saying why, you could say, what makes you ask? Instead of saying, I cannot solve your problem, or you have to solve your own problems, you could say, how can we solve these problems? How can we? The idea of we would give the support to the other party. The other party might think, wow, this guy is empathetic. Instead of saying, you might wonder in some sort of communication or negotiation, you might think that the other party is so focused about a petty thing in your point of view, but probably it might be a grand scheme of things from his point of view. So instead of saying, why you are focused on a petty thing. You could say, what about this disagreement is so important to you? I would like to understand. So you let the other party to explain. Now you see the communication is not about flashy jargon or the accent or the words you use. It's about asking the right question at the right time. When you start improving these, probably you will start improving your communication skills a bit. Now I take your memory back to some of the questions which I raised. I mentioned that instead of focusing more on yes, you could probably get more by focusing on no. You might wonder, yeah, how? Okay, I'll give you some examples. Now let's say you have to discuss something important with your boss. It's late night and you see your boss is walking towards the lift and you just run towards him and you say, oh, do you have a few minutes? The boss might have some dinner plans with his family. He might be wondering, oh, this guy is just trying to waste a couple of minutes of mine and I'm already late for my dinner. You are not giving him the control he needs. Now, instead, if you are to ask, is now a bad time to talk? You are giving him the space. He might probably say, yes, it's a bad time because I'm already running late for my dinner. Sometimes he might think, wow, he gave me the control. So I might probably spend a couple of minutes because he really thinks about me. See how it works in your favor. No-oriented question works in your favor better than a yes-oriented question. Another example. You can sometimes put a person into the hot seat. You can put your point of view, you can put your thought process and say, do you agree? You're not giving him the control that he needs. He's a bit overwhelmed. Instead, what about you say, do you disagree? Instead of saying, what do you want or do you want this? You could say, are you against this? You could have a fantastic product idea instead of just gloating about your product idea and then asking him, do you want? You could probably say, are you against this concept? Think through. Imagine if someone asks you these questions, how do you feel about it? And that's the exact same way that you could apply for your betterment. Is this a good idea? Instead, you could say, is this a bad idea? Because if you ask, is this a good idea? The other party might say yes, but he might not necessarily feel about that idea. He just don't want to be rude to you. But if you ask the question honestly, is this a bad idea? You are giving the other party the time and the opportunity to think through before the party responds. And this is quite important when it comes to questioning. So focus on that, the no-oriented question than a yes-oriented question, so that you could probably get a better outcome than if you were to just trying to get yes, yes, yes all the time. All right. Now, let's move on to leadership. Now, again, leadership is a multitude of skills, so multiple qualities that you need to approach. Now, communication is one part of it. Negotiation is another part of it, but it doesn't stop it being from there. If you want to be a good leader, first and foremost, you need to be a good people manager. That's the universal truth number one. Imagine if you are an employee, whom do you select to work with? A bad manager or a good manager? Now, the same thing applies. If you're a bad people manager, you would not get the best resources to work with you. Because obviously the best people would want to work with best people managers, and best people managers attract best people. So you have to be a great human being if you want to be a great leader. And the only way you know that, just ask your confidant, you ask your people, honestly, what do you think about my leadership style? Do you think I'm a good person? If they think that you're not, probably you need to start working on those. And you have to always define what success looks like. Great leaders will tell their team members what they really want to do. I'll give you an example. Let's say your organization is severely affected through COVID-19. So your organization is pretty thin with its cash position, and you cannot literally start spending money, millions and millions of dollars. But if your team is focusing on arranging an IFRS training, probably that's not congruent with the organization objective. That might have happened because you haven't put the objectives or success, you haven't defined what the success looks like. It's worthwhile if you just let the team know what's the organization objectives and what your own objectives are, so that they understand what's more important. Avoid micromanagement, adopt your management style. And this is quite important if you have just become a leader. If you had been a performer and you were just being promoted to a leader, people tend to think that whatever the way that they did their work is the best. They always complain, oh, when I was you, I didn't do it in this way. I did it much better. You need to get out of it. You need to snap out of it. You need to really make sure that it's a different person. He or she may have a different attribute altogether. So you let the person to manage. You give that person the space. Do not micromanage. People hate that. But at the same time, you have to adapt your management style to their needs, the team members' need. When you were a team member, you would have been better off if someone just told you what needs to be done and you got it done, you had your freedom. But that is not true with every employee. Some people really needs to be followed closely. Some people really needs to be handheld throughout the journey. But on the other hand, some people really needs to be told what's your vision and they will just answer. So you have to adopt your style to the situation. Listen, I cannot stress this enough. If you want to be a great leader, you have to listen, not to respond, but to understand. Build trust. Let others share openly. If you do not build trust as a leader, the only way you will find out about a negative feedback is through someone else, because your people would not trust to give you an honest feedback about what's going wrong. So always build trust. You can build trust by being a great human being. Engage team by making decisions collectively. So what do I mean by that? Now, let's say for an instance, you as an organization has an off-the-shelf accounting package. You want to move into an ERP solution, let's say it's for HANA. So now if you just tell your team, you know what, the senior management has decided just to dump the off-the-shelf package and we are moving towards S4HANA. The team might be like, yeah, what's new? You guys always make decisions and just let us know. We're just the guinea pigs, we'll just do it. That's okay. But instead, if you just made the decisions differently, or if you get through the process differently by collaborating, you could ask your guys, hey guys, you know what? This off-the-shelf accounting package is no good for us because we cannot do three-way matching. We don't have much data. There is no insight available. I think it's best that we move into an ERP solution. What do you guys think? Let them answer. And then once they answer, you get a feel about who is really up for this project. Then what would you feel like? Oh, by the way, you seem to be really aware about what's going on. Why don't you become a part of the team as a subject matter expert? So likewise, you handpick the people who are really good at that project and you make them decide what they really want to do. Obviously, it's the senior management team who decides what they really want to do. But if that decision comes through their mouth, they are going to own it. Now, imagine at a later stage of time, if someone else is going against it, you don't have to defend your decision. Your team members will defend it for you. This is the beauty of collaborating your decisions rather than just telling your team either my way or the highway. Accepting responsibilities are great. I mentioned that earlier. I cannot stress enough. You have to always accept responsibility rather than letting your team hang out to dry. You have to accept responsibility as a leader. If a boss asks you what went wrong, you have to just say, you know what, it's my mistake. I should have reviewed it rather than just letting this person getting exposed to you. That shows that you are a great person and you are ready to take the next step. Prepare to have the difficult discussion. It's not always rosy. It's not about being polite all the time. You sometimes might definitely need to have a difficult discussion. You might have a performance issue. You might have to let a person go. You might have to make a person redundant. When that comes, you have to be assertive. You need to be factful. You need to listen to the facts, take that emotional element out of it, let the other party explain and make sure that you become decisive. And I mentioned, don't leave them hang out to dry when things go south. If things go well, that's great. If the things are going north, that's what everyone wants to go to. But if things go south, you do not just let the team hang out to dry or just throw them under the bus. And you say that, oh, it's my team. What could I do? That's the best I could get out of them. That means that you are just finding a scapegoat to pass the blame on. And obviously, creating a safe environment to enable the exchange of different point of views. And you would only do that you would only get a better decision if you would be able to get other parties to tell you a different point of view. If your team is filled with people who would always say yes to you, probably when you make a wrong decision, they would say yes. And when things go wrong, you have to probably live with all consequences. But what if there are team members who always critically claim whatever you say? That means probably instead of going with the wrong decision, you have a better chance of getting that through with them. And also, it's always important to make sure you stress to the team that work experience and networking is where that they're going to deliver or they are going to develop themselves rather than formal education, because the work experience and networking goes a long way than just going to a classroom and just listen to someone else. All right. I know I have been keeping quite a lot. I have been talking quite a lot. Now, let's take a moment to pause and let us throw you out another poll question. So this is the third and last poll question for you. So hopefully it might appear in a minute if the panelists could share. Yeah, how often do you apply fear-based leadership? So take a few seconds to think through and please put your answer in. All right, let's see the results. So there is a clear winner. Depending on the situation, do it sparingly. All right, let's talk through that. Now, the wind and the sun and Aesop's fable. When we grew up, we heard about Aesop. Now, I'm going to give you one of Aesop's famous fable, which is the wind and the sun. You might have heard of it. So what is the story of this? One fine day, the wind and sun were arguing who is the strongest. Both of them wanted to prove that they were stronger than the other. Now, when they were arguing, they saw a man walking by. Now, the wind told sun, hey, you know what? I would be the strongest out of two of us if I rip his jacket apart, or if I just blow his jacket out. Sun said, fine, go for it. Now, wind volunteered, and it blew its strongest force possible. It blew the wind the strongest way it could be. Now, more and more, the strength that the wind was applying to for blowing it off, the man was clutching to his coat. He was not letting his jacket or the coat go away. More the wind tried, more the person got himself clutched into his coat. After some time, the wind was exhausted and said that, yep, I tried my level best. I gave my best shot, but I was unable to blow his jacket off. Over to you, Sun. Well, what Sun did was simple. He didn't put all his effort, the strength and the force. It just shone brightly. And when it shone brightly, the person himself realized, my goodness, it's sweltering hot. There is no way me wearing this jacket. Let me remove it by myself. Sun won that competition without even pulling up a finger. And so by proven, it was the strongest. Now, what's the moral of this story? Gentle persuasion is mightier than stronger force. You might sometimes think that the carrot and stick is the only way forward, but you have to always realize that sometimes letting the person understand is far better than telling them what you really want them to do. The person himself might self-realize what they want to do, and they might make sure that they might end up doing what you really wanted them to do. This is the Aesop's fable on wind and the sun. Why it's important? Because I'm not going to now going to talk about the fear-based leadership. Is fear-based leadership worth it? The clear winner, it seems to be most of you thought, or almost 2/3 of the room thought, that you have to apply it sparingly. I have a different point of view. I believe that you shouldn't necessarily apply fear-based leadership at all. Started with the wind and the sun story or the fable. Now I'm going to explain why I think so. Because it obviously reduces cognitive ability. The more and more you start applying fear-based leadership, the cognitive ability of the other party loses. Now I take you back your memory to the first thing I mentioned. It's about that stress hormone, which is getting released, either flight, fight, or freeze. And when that happens, you might not necessarily get the right outcome out of them. I know you heard stories about Steve Jobs, but at the same time, yes, sometimes he may have turned out to be well, but at the same time, he had pushed away some of the great employees that he had because of the fear-based leadership style he had. And it obviously breeds resentment and revenge. If you apply that, when those people get into that position that they can take out against you, they might do that. And it probably proves that the leader is insecure. You might think that you have to apply fear-based leadership. But when you apply fear-based leadership, they're going to talk about you. They're going to say that, look, that person is a CEO, that person is a senior manager. He or she shouldn't have behaved that way. That means he's insecure. Now put yourself into that position that if you're an employee who is being driven by a fear-based leader, you might probably think through or talk through like that. And obviously it triggers flight and fright. It's a biological response, as I explained. And it disengages the team. The more you apply fear-based leadership, more it is going to disengage the team. So you have to be careful. So that's why I personally feel that it probably has to be never. Now, let's quickly move on to some of the other soft skills. I like to give various chords when I talk about these things because it generally gives you that message what we really try to cover. Sometimes you want to change your life. You cannot move mountains overnight. Only way you can do that if you change your daily habits. You start small and all of a sudden it would have become a bigger thing when you didn't even think about it. And that's the first message that I want to give you in this element. And always try to be an encourager. You see, even if you go to your social media feed, you always see there are a lot of critics. Any decision anyone takes, there are hundreds of critics who are going to see the negative side of it. And that's the human nature. So be an encourager instead of a critique. You always see the positive side of it. Remember, if you see positive side of everything, that's going to go into your lifestyle and you are going to be positive no matter what goes on. And don't worry excessively. There are things which you can't control. You may have given the best shot and thereafter it will be decided by the fate or the luck or the randomness. So don't overthink once you give your best shot. And obviously you have to realize this. If you have got into a problem because you went in a certain direction, you probably wouldn't come out of it by going through the same direction. You might have to apply a different principle. Now keeping that in mind, let's start with time management. Now, this is a very important formula. This is just a mathematical formula. Now, why it's important? 1 into 365 equals 1. What does it signify? That says, if you are yourself today, if you do nothing to improve yourself, not by a tiny amount, not by the tiniest margin, you would be the exact same person at the end of the year's time. And if you apply inflation from finance perspective, you may have deteriorated a bit. But on the other hand, if you just start improving yourself tiny, just 1% every day, not moving mountains, just 1%, just a small bit, just being a good person, just by 1%, you would be a 38% improved person by the end of the year. I'll demonstrate this through an example. You want to start walking. You do not want to start walking 1 hour on the day one. Probably you start with just a 5 minutes walk. And you start adding 1 minute every day. At the end of the first week, you are already walking 12 minutes. At the end of the second week, you're already walking 19 minutes. At the third week, 26 minutes. And at the end of the first month, you're already walking 33 minutes. And that's probably easy enough if you continue to do so over a year's time, that for you to maintain a healthy lifestyle. And it's a small, tiny change that you did, and you did it on a consistent basis. And that's what's important. And I think I saw earlier that majority of you like to go through your phones, emails, and social feed. That's great. I mean, end of the day, that small thing which would be in your hand gives you information more than what the United States president had 20 years ago. But at the same time, equally, it's the equal distractor for you. And that's why it's important, not just for kids, but for all of us, that we put strict timelines, strict guidelines in using social media. Put timelines to go through your emails, put timelines to go through your social media feed, and make sure that you use various softwares and apps available for you to measure the usage of those, so that you do not excessively use, because it's not good for your brain, it's not good for your eyesight. And every time you have been given a task which you need to achieve with a limited time frame, always try to divide and conquer rather than try to struggle by yourself. You might be given a significant project. All what you need to do is divide it into the smallest possible element, and you start picking up the low-hanging fruits first. When you do that, by no time you have already conquered majority of it, and then you move on to the next. Again, it starts with a small tiny thing and you move on gradually. And more importantly, celebrate every tiny victory. People always think that, you know what, I'm not a person who celebrates everything in my life. I do not like celebrating. That's not good. You have to celebrate every tiny victory. I'm not necessarily saying you have to gloat it to your friends or others because they might find it boring. You can celebrate it to yourself. If you have done a good deed today, let's say you lent a helping hand to a friend, just celebrate it by yourself. You don't have to gloat about it with others. You can just tell it to yourself, wow, I really helped him out, which proves that I'm not that bad. Or you may have written an excellent essay today, which you wanted to publish for the last year, but finally you got you mustered the courage to publish it. Just celebrate that with yourself. Because every time you celebrate, that's going to give you a positive vibe. And more the positive vibes you have, more a better person that you're going to be. After all, you want to be a better person or better version of yourself than yesterday. So that's what's important. Resilience. Now, this is important more than ever. Resilience is advancing despite adversity. This is the time which will test your resilience. This is a time where you are in a once in 100 economic event. COVID-19 has affected pretty much everyone in this world, all the 7.5 billion people, one way or the other. If you just get yourself sucked into it, and if you say, you know what, it's an external event, I can't do anything, probably that shows that you may not have that much of resilience. Resilience is always about forgetting whatever going on in the external world. Rather, you focus on what's controllable within you, and you do work towards that. Sometimes with a global pandemic like this, it may come up with great opportunities for you. I'll give an example of myself. I always love to talk. I always love to get up and share my knowledge with people. And when I started traveling, when I moved out of Sri Lanka, I probably, it reduced the opportunities which I could use for that. But now with COVID-19, I could use Zoom. And imagine today, I'm 8 hours ahead of you. It's late night for me, but we are interacting, me and you, based in different time zones. So the geographical borders have become a thing in the past. This is a new opportunity which we might not have necessarily thought through just a few months ago. Now, likewise, the adversity always presents you new opportunities as well. So find that opportunity which you can work through and start working towards it. And obviously, resilience is not just about that mindset. It starts with everything. For you to be resilient, first and foremost, you have to be healthy. After all, you need to have a healthy diet. If you're not healthy, you have to always focus about your health. So start eating a healthy diet and also do exercise. Exercise is not all about hitting the gym every day in, day out. It's just about moderate walking, just making sure you cover 7,000 to 10,000 steps a day so that you can have a healthy lifestyle. Tenacity, no matter what happens, you focus on your end goal and you go towards that. You don't end up comparing yourself to others. You just focus on yourself. And tenacity, because everyone has a different lifestyle and you don't have to worry whether someone is in front of you or behind you. You just focus on your lifestyle. Collaborate. You don't necessarily have to suffer on your own. You sometimes have your confidant, you sometimes have your family support, and you can get their support when it is needed for you to achieve your vision. Composure, that means regulate emotions. It's important that some time of a day that you devote to regulate your emotions. You take your time out and you regulate emotion. You think through about what you have done, what's the person you want to be. So you make sure, and that time is used to regulate emotions as well. Don't always lash out. Don't always show your emotions to others, because in that way, probably people might misinterpret what you really are. So always take that time out Just keep your composure. Make sure that you get yourself calmed down. And always reason out. Don't always assume. Everything happens for a reason. Reason out. Try to understand why this has happened and why it is important, how it is important to your life, so that you make better decisions. And flexibility. Gone were the days that you would be able to do the same job task till you retire. Your parents would have done the exact same job for the 30 years when they left the school till they retire. But if you are lucky enough, you could be able to do the same job for next 5 years. I'm not talking about the company, probably I'm talking about the job responsibilities. You might be moved around because it's such an intricate and an intertwined world where things change dramatically with the advent of IT. So you need to be focused on that. That's why it's always important. Don't define yourself with the job you do. Instead, approach yourself as an entrepreneur, selling your skills to people in need. That's why it's important that you start picking up those various skills. So every time there is an opportunity come up, you can sell your skills. That's more important. And as I always say, you have to expect the best. You have to be positive about your attitude, but at the same time, plan for the worst. If you're living hand to mouth, which means you spend everything you earn in every month, that means if you are to lose your job tomorrow, you are going to be insecure. So plan for the worst. What if I am to lose my job? What I'm going to do for the next 6 months to 1 year? And then obviously prepare to be surprised. Sometimes luck could be in your way. Remember, the bird who sits on a tree never trusts the branch. Instead, they trust their wings. They believe their wings better than the branch. Branch is an externality and they don't really care what happens with it. And that's the exact same mindset that you go with. That there are things which are beyond your control and don't try to control those. Instead, focus on things which you can control and move on gradually towards that. And you would end up achieving your objectives over a long period of time. And as most people say, soft skills get little respect, but will make or break your career, as you have some understood, or you yourself have self-realized, as you have said in the first question, where you believe that communication skills is something that you need to improve. That's true, because if you want to grow up the ladder, not just communication skills, all soft skills matter. End of the day, it's a tightrope walk, and you need to have hard and soft skills for you to grow up in the ladder. So make sure you focus towards that. So that's the end of the formal session. Thank you very much for your time. And if you want to keep in touch with me, even after this, you would be able to subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is Pramitha's Vlogs, or you would be able to keep in touch with me through my Facebook page, which is Pramitha's Blogging, or through my LinkedIn page. Now let's move on to the Q&A. Over to you, Shanta.
Am I audible to you?
Yes, you are. I can hear you quite well.
Thank you, Pramitha, taking us to wonderful presentation with us today. We can move on to Q&A session now. We already have few questions. Dear participants, please type your questions on the question box if you want to join our discussion. We'll try to address as many questions as we can. Let's move on to the first question. It's from Usman. It's about communication skills. Let me read out the question first. When it's come to communication skills, let's say great speaking skill, how much of it is natural ability? How far we can improve it with training and coaching? As you mentioned, Martin Luther or Obama are great speakers. Isn't their ability more natural than trained? Hope your question
that's a good question.
Right.
Yep.
Over to you,
question. Yeah. Well, yeah, true. There could be natural ability which comes through with that. That's true. But natural ability doesn't necessarily define that you become a great communicator. I wish if there is a person who used to go to school with me who could be there. If you speak to a person who went to school with me, they would say that I was a very shy person. I was hardly anyone at school. I would just stay there at my class. I would just stay at the desk. I would just write down whatever it is and I'll just go home. That's it. And I would have probably got 45 marks in the grade 9. Up to grade 9, I was between 50, 60, 45. And grade 9 was the lowest point of my time for my English paper where I took 45 marks. Where I am now, it's different. I don't probably think that everything which I have is all natural. Probably I developed it over a time period because I worked on that. Yes, there is an element that is natural, when you talk about people, Obamas and Martin Luther King, but you don't have to be a Martin Luther King for you to grow up in the ladder. You can be a great communicator by just learning every day in, day out. How I improved my communication skills? By reading. I may have read over 1,000 books over my lifetime, and I may have reread some of those books. And sometimes I may have started communicating myself in English the way that I always wanted to do over the last few years. And if I really look at it, I think it has improved my communication skills rather than talking about genetic ability. So I firmly believe, going through my own experience, if you just focus on tiny things such as reading a book, reading a blog, start communicating in English as and when you get the chance, you would still be able to improve yourself rather than just focusing on the genetics. Yes, it has a part to play, but you don't necessarily need to be bogged down about it. You could definitely improve it if you give the right attention. After all, communicating in English, I continue to ring fence it to English because I believe the business language is English, because at the end of the day, it's a language. It's about getting your composure in. It's about putting your strength. It's about putting your confidence in and making sure that you get there. And I believe that can be achieved through practice, not just a day in, day out practice, but a practice over a long period of time.
Thank you, Pramitha. It is very clear. Let's move on to second question. Well, it is also about communication skill. I think everyone is interested talking about communication skill. Maybe you have cleared it very well. So it's also about the communication. Right. Let me read out the question first. Currently, communication between colleagues, staff, and their managers, even at the highest level, is becoming casual and less rigid. With millennials who have completely different attitude compared to the previous generation managers, start taking up higher management positions, relationship at work is becoming easy and less formal. Anyone who is too formal is considered old school. Therefore, during these times, how do we find the balance between being formal, professional, and friendly, approachable? Is it clear?
Okay, well, yep, it is. It is. It's a minefield. I perfectly understand. As I said in my formal session as well, we are dealing with complex human beings. They're different. Even if you talk about millennials, sometimes they might not necessarily want to be informal. Sometimes they want to be formal as well. Yes, you're right. Like when there is a different age group, they have a different way of approaching. And that is why it's important when you communicate with people, you become empathetic. Now, the way that I do, every time I start communicating with someone else, I always give them the benefit of doubt. I always try to listen to them first, so that I try to evaluate what kind of a person they are. I might be wrong, because obviously you won't be able to evaluate human beings all the time. Always evaluate what this person values the most. For an instance, if I'm dealing with the EGM of my department, he likes to be formal. He likes for me to be formal all the time. So I approach it in that way. But on the other hand, if I'm to speak to the EGM of finance instead of EGM of business unit, he's quite casual. So there is no way that I'm going to use the exact same structure to him, and how I did that, no one told me that this is the way that you should communicate with them. I just understood by just observing them. I just observed it by being empathetic with them. Sometimes it's also important that you clear it out. I talked about the elephant in the room. Sometimes you might not be clear. It might not necessarily be clear what's the best way for you to communicate. So probably it's worthwhile asking them, probably not all the time, but sometimes it's worthwhile. If you're unclear, you could probably ask them, what's the best approach for me to deal with you? Or sometimes you could get a feedback from the colleagues who have dealt successfully with them, and you can get their views when you start communicating, because what you don't want to do, you end up communicating in a way that the other party doesn't appreciate. You see, as a leader, I generally consider ourselves to be leaders because you need to grow up in the ladder. And if you're in a leader's position, you need to make sure that you understand different aspects, the different communication styles. So that's why I told you earlier that it's always important to have that flexible mindset rather than having the fixated mindset. For instance, if I meet my friends, I don't want to be formal. I just try to be fun. I just try to crack jokes. I just try to get into their level and make sure that I understand what they say. Because if I try to be formal, obviously they're just going to kick me out. They're like, oh, this guy is so boring. But on the other hand, I cannot do the same thing when I go and discuss with the GM of the business unit. Obviously, I have to be I have to be formal. I can't start talking about with him if he expect me to be formal about what I ate and what did I do during my spare time. Instead, he's focused more on the business. So I just approach it in that way, and I just evaluate by being empathetic to the other party. Sometimes I'm wrong, and if I'm wrong, I just clarify it from the person.
Thank you, Pramitha. It's very clear. Let's move on to the next question. All right, it's about environment that the people are working. The question comes from Niranga. Any recommendation to people who are working in multinational, multicultural environments, especially who has a lack of English communication skills? This is the normal situation in this region.
Mm-hmm.
Is that clear, Pramitha?
Well, yes, I think I have also experienced that while I was
in, of course.
I spent 6 years in Middle East as well. Now, it can be probably sometimes it can be a communication problem at your end, but on the other hand, it can be a communication issue from the other end as well, because I have faced that thing numerous times as well. Sometimes you have to go a bit slow. I'll give you an example. Like if the other party doesn't understand English much, probably you have to go slow. I'll give you an example. Let's say you wanted to know whether the person has raised a purchase requisition. Instead of asking, do you mind telling me whether you have raised the purchase requisition? That's too much words for him. You could say, purchase order is done, all good. That's it. So the person understands that. So I try, this is the way that you sometimes speak. And if you want to start learning a new language, and this is what you generally do as well, you start speaking in a way, you start breaking it down in the simplest way. So you probably approach in that way. And I had this experience when I during my audit times as well, where I had to communicate. When I started communicating with the longer sentences that I would do, generally people tend to get confused. So I try to break it down and I try to get to the simplest level possible. So it's again being that empathetic and making sure that you generally address what they really want to do, because end of the day, English is just a means, it's not the end. It's just a means to achieve your ends. So as long as the other party understands, and this is the crux of communication, as I mentioned in my first session in communication is all about letting the other party understand what you really want to do. How you can do that? You can do that by being simple, and you can do that by being listening or being understanding what the other person is really want to do and what's the background of the other person. And if that's the case, probably you might be more successful than trying to have all set one approach for everything. So that's my answer for that.
Thank you, Pramitha. It's very clear. All right, we can move on to next question. It's about the exceptionally how we work at the work, right? So the question is about passing the exam with average marks and performing averagely at work does not need a lot of focus and effort. But to be exceptionally at the work we do, like what we have achieved at C exam, very right, extremely high level of focus is required. Could you please give us few tips, yes, really worth, on how to keep the focus at very high level all the time, considering the amount of distractions we have these days with social media? Yes, we won't avoid it. Overly hyped news channels and information overload. Is that clear, Pramitha?
Yep, that's clear, loud and clear. Now, yes, that's a very good question. How should I start that? Well, the best thing for you to do is avoid distractions. That's the first and foremost thing. I'll give you an example. Now, I do investments by myself. I do invest in share market, but I never listen to the share price. I never watch the share price movement day in, day out. Why? Because I don't care. I'll give you an example. If you are investing in property and imagine every day in, day out, the property prices are going to appear like the share prices, what you're going to do? You're going to do nothing, because you're going to invest in over a longer time. You don't really care what the short-term share price volatilities are. So that's the first example that I want to give. I remove the distractions to start with. Even if I go to social media, one thing you would know, if you're in my social media feed, I become politically agnostic all the time. You would never see me commenting on politically. You would never see me going and criticizing one particular person because of that political or religious views. I'd never do that. I avoid that because I believe that's a distraction as well. Because every person has their political view, every person has their religious view. There is no point of you trying to prove your point of view because every person has their own point of view. So that's the second most important thing. And the third thing I generally try to do is focusing on that tiny things which are called habits. Now, as you rightly pointed out, for you to achieve the excellence which is needed, you need to focus on things day in, day out. For an instance, I think the person talked about the CA exam success. That's absolutely true. You cannot be success by just being genetically good. Like in my case, I never believed that I was really good at that. I thought I had to give the best amount of effort possible for me to be successful at the CA exam. So what did I do? I made sure, even if it is just 1 hour that I have to study, I just studied it. I just studied every day. Maybe sometimes I ended up working 14, 15, 16 hours at the office. I go home, take some dinner, rest for 15 minutes. I feel exhausted to the fullest, but I still found that 1 hour. Once you find that energy, you can continue with that. And that's what exactly I do now. Over the last 2 weeks, I may have read about 50 investment magazines, just 2 pages, so 100 pages altogether. So you might realize how on earth you find time to that. I generally work about 9 to 10 hours every day because the way things go on with my role, I have to put 9 to 10 hours, and sometimes I end up working weekdays for some time as well. But what I do is I have put set timelines in my calendar to go through these. I never miss that. Because I go through that, I become confident. And I told you another example, I read about 30 books a year. I again have set timelines to do that. And at the same time, I have set timelines to give time to the family, which is required, obviously. Now, the only way you can manage that is if you subdivided everything to smaller things. If you're talking about you being successful at your professional level, because obviously now you are a chartered accountant or any other qualified person, you do not want to be, you do not want to just focus on the bigger picture. Yes, you have to focus on the bigger picture. If you think about how do I become a CFO, that means you haven't broken it down to the small task. Now, what I do is, yes, I always wanted to be a good finance professional, but I have small, simple tasks that I need to do, let's say next week, next month, next year, next 2 years. Sometimes I have reminders. Every time I remember something that I need to do, I put a reminder saying that, yeah, I need to do this in such and such day. For an instance, I need to renew my insurance, life insurance by this day. I just put that as a reminder so that I don't have to worry. When the time comes, I just do it. So it's about focusing on those smaller things, and it helps you. And same with communication skills as well. I give you the example in the first question as well. When you ask the question whether it's all genetic, I was able to relate to myself. Like, I'm pretty sure it was not all genetics, given the fact that I was only able to get 47 marks at the grade 9, and where I am now, it's all due to the hard work that I had put that through by focusing on those tiny things, but in a day in, day out. I never focused on bigger things, but I focused on small things, but every day I focused on that. Remember that formula I gave? 1 into 365, or to the power of 365, just 1, you would be the same person. But if you just focus tiny things to improve yourself just by 1% every day, you would be a 38% improved person at the first year. Now continue that over 15, 16, 17 years down the line, you would be a massively improved person. So that's probably the answer that I could give you, Shanta, for that.
Thank you, Pramitha. Thank you for answering the last question for the day. It looks like we have answered most of your questions. Pramitha, is there anything else you would like to mention?
Not from my end. Yep, I'm all good. Yep, I think we have covered pretty much everything which I wanted to cover today.
That sounds great. The next, it is time for a vote of thanks speech. Sman, over to you.
Thank you, Pramitha. Good evening, everyone. Today is a very special day for CS Sri Lanka KSA Chapter, as one of our prominent members, Pramitha Ranshika, is with us. On behalf of the President, Executive Committee, and the members of the chapter, I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to Pramitha for accepting our invitation to share his valuable thoughts on soft skills, communication skills, leadership skills, and negotiation skills. Today's session was very relevant and insightful, and it covered wide range of subjects. I am sure the participants benefited from it. Pramitha, having your presence alone is really inspiring. I would like to thank all the participants from CA Sri Lanka chapters of UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, and Australia, and also the members joined us from Sri Lanka and Iran. Thank you, members from Riyadh and Dammam, for joining us today. A very big and heartfelt thanks to our participants from other professional bodies from Jeddah. Your active participation encourages us to organize more sessions on various subjects to benefit our members and colleagues. I would also like to thank Shanta Upatilaka and the organizing committee headed by Nanda Senaviratna and supported by Vajira Premaratna and Shadni Naji, who worked tirelessly to organize this webinar. Finally, and importantly, I thank the members of CS Sri Lanka KSA Chapter attending today's webinar and the support you provided to the organizing committee. Thank you, everyone. Over to you, Shanta.
Thank you, Usman, for delivering the great word of thanks speech. Right, finally, before we wrap up today's session, I would like to request all participants to leave your valuable feedback about today's webinar on the chat box. This will help us to improve our next webinar, which will be held very soon. Finally, I would like to thank our speaker today, Pramitha Ranshika, for taking time out from your busy schedule and making a very insightful presentation with us today. And also our organizing committee for coordinating and making this even more successful. And last but not least, thank you everyone for participating in today's webinar. Hope to see you all again next time. Till then, stay safe and goodbye, everyone.
Thank you very much, Shanta, and thank you very much for the CA KSA Chapter Organizing Committee for the opportunity as well.
Thank you very much, Pramitha, once again.
Thanks. See ya. Bye.
See you. Bye.